call the meeting to order. Paul, you got the rolls. We don't.
All right, yeah, filling in for Celeste tonight. Commissioner Mead,
Here.
Commissioner Slivka,
Here.
Commissioner Evans,
Here.
Commissioner Leidig,
Here.
Commissioner Stocking,
Here.
Commissioner Case,
Here.
Commissioner Jarouche, Commissioner Kozarov.
Here.
All right, before we get started, I want to thank John for taking chairmanship for a couple meetings that I was missing. I appreciate that. And it's been a while since I've been here, but I do appreciate you doing that.
See you back, Mr. Chairman.
What's that?
It's good to see you back, Mr.
Oh,
Chairman.
thanks. I appreciate that. So approval of the agenda is the next item.
Move to approve.
There's one minor thing. I think it says absent.
Agenda.
Oh, agenda. I'm sorry.
Agenda, yeah.
I thought you
I
said
have the same.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. Never mind.
Okay.
Did we get a second?
Get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Cindy. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, next item is the approval of minutes and MIM. October
This is
26th.
Nothing substantive, but it says Chairman Slivka and Commissioner Stocking were
Yeah.
absent. I think it needs to be flipped.
Oh, all right. I will get that switched. Okay,
Any other changes?
thank you.
Motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so next item on the agenda is public hearing for a zoning text amendment to section 1112-9, prohibited signs related to removing signs painted directly on surfaces of any exterior wall of any building from the list of prohibited signs. The applicant is Bernie Lebkowski and Francis Savez of Craft Urban. I'll read the procedures for the public hearing before we get started. We now enter the public hearing portion of our meeting. It is the Plans Commission's job to conduct these hearings in order to receive testimony for and against petitions for general amendments to the zoning ordinance, zoning map amendments, zoning text amendment, special permits, and amendments to special permits. The procedure we will follow with this request is as follows. First, the Planning Commission Secretary or designated representative will read or describe written items, reports, and plans into the record. Second, the petitioner will present testimony in favor of the petition and will present any supporting plans and exhibits. Third, the commission members will have an opportunity to question the petitioner. Fourth, the commission will receive citizen testimony both for and against the petition. Questions about the proposal may be directed to the petitioner or the petitioner's witnesses, or questions about the planning commission process itself may be directed to me. Following such testimony, the petitioner and the plan commission may ask questions for those who testify. Finally, the petitioner may provide a rebuttal to any testimony in opposition. When all the testimony is brought into the record, the hearing will be closed and the plan commission will make a recommendation to city council in the form of a motion or motions. In order to give testimony, you must provide your name and address on the registration sheet located at the entrance of the hearing room. By signing the petition or registration sheet, you agree to understand that anything you say will be considered sworn testimony and affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. When giving your testimony, please approach the lectern, speak directly into the microphone so that you may be heard. Please begin by stating your name and giving your address. If you speak additional times, please state your name each time for the record. Please be concise when presenting your testimony, and if your point has already been made, it is not necessary to repeat it. Each of these points is recorded and will be considered as the Plan Commission develops findings of fact and recommendation or recommendations. You may provide your testimony in written form, but such written testimony must be presented to the Plan Commission Secretary or the designated representative prior to the close of the hearing. After the process is completed and everyone wishing to present testimony has spoken, the commission will then decide whether it has heard adequate testimony in order to make a decision. If it has, the public hearing will be closed. After the public hearing is closed, the Plan Commission will refrain from receiving any additional testimony either for or against the petition. There is one exception to this rule. City staff will submit a report based on the testimony presented at the hearing. This report will consider comments or concerns from all city's departments such as fire department, public works, and engineering. At this time, I will administer the oath of office. Those who have signed a registration form, anyone wishing to give sworn testimony, ask questions, or cross-examine anyone giving sworn testimony, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Paul, do we have things on the record?
Yeah, the contents of the Plan Commission file is a zoning ordinance text amendment application and narrative filed by Francisco Chavez of Craft Urban on October 24th, 2017. We have a survey of comparable communities throughout the Chicago region regarding painted signs on building surfaces, a memorandum from the Community Development Department, which summarizes the request and provides staff's analysis, and a certificate of publication for the daily, from the Daily Herald for the legal notice that was published on November 29th for tonight's public hearing.
Okay, very good. We'll hear for the petitioner.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? My name is Francisco Chavez. I am one of the partners up the street at 211 James. My other business partner, Bernie Luskowski, I'm his proxy for tonight. But we're here because of the fact that there's been a sign that's been painted directly onto the building, and what we are is I don't know if you guys have had the chance to get into the restaurant yet, but we're sourced locally from local producers, and we do small shareable plates, and we are very craft focused, hence the name Craft, very focused on our food and artwork, that type of thing. And then the urban part is trying to bring the urban feel from a metro area to Geneva, if you will. So part of what I'm going to walk through today is just kind of how we got to where we are. So this is the outside of the building. It was formerly the Nosh space, and we painted over the building and put quite a bit of work and vetted quite a few creative agencies to work with us to get this done. One of the things that I overlooked was the fact that you do not allow signs painted directly onto buildings, and hence us coming together tonight and in the past. So where I'm going with this is that if you look at this sign and working with the creative agency out of Chicago, it's a natural flow, and perhaps what we did actually think about putting a mounted sign out there, but we just felt that the flow was a little bit more creative from the aspect of it being an urban feel. So if you look at the inside of the building, we did quite a bit of work to the inside of what was the former Nosh space. Not only did we do, kind of a mural and some artwork on the outside, but we also did quite a bit of extensive work on the inside. Did a lot of sandblasting on the inside to make it more, and to give it an industrial feel, if you will. This is also, so you can see the beams that are that stand out there as well. And then that countertop is 1,800 pounds of concrete poured over rebar. And then we did an epoxy feel. And that's, again, the industrial feel, the urban feel. And, I guess the effect of it being, it just being a natural flow into the building itself. The folks that we used, the agency that we used to create this artwork for us they're out of Pilsen, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Fulton Market, the Fulton Meat Market down in the city of Chicago. They put the same exact, or they kind of put the same feel and effort into the Bridgeford Meat Market's building there, and so. The reason that I put the quote out there is because it's kind of what we wanted to bring to Geneva as well, right? So there's been folks that have stopped by purposely to take pictures in front of the building because it does it doesn't attract for necessarily the sign, but just because of the artwork that's on the outside of the building, right? So, and I think taking the sign down would be a little bit of a degradation to the exterior and the flow of the concept, if you will. And that's why I put that quote there next to it, just because it's just something that people get talking about, and I think it resonates quite a bit with folks that like stuff like that. And I think we've done, so far so good. We've got pretty good buzz going with the restaurant. So these guys they're world renowned. I don't need to spend too much time on this, but they've done and been commissioned to do quite a few pieces around the world. They've done commissioned to do work for Pepsi, Red Bull, Coca-Cola, and then again they've been out in Germany, Italy, Canada, etc. to do work for them. So very well known, and again, I guess not being braggadocious by any means, but I think we really did put quite a bit of attention into the quality of what we wanted to bring to Geneva, just because of the fact that we know that there is a standard that's out here. We wanted to either be on par with that or kind of maybe spice up the game a little bit, right? So that's why I go into that. A little bit of the sign specifications. So again, a lot of attention to detail was put into it. We did 3 coats of Sherwin-Williams high resiliency paint, which provides outstanding resiliency, coverage, and durability as well, right? So as far as the durability goes, there's a 10-year, I guess, guarantee of no chip, if you will. And then also the vinyl stencils that were used, the creative agency worked with another group that came up with the sign itself and helped put that up there. Kind of getting here towards the end, one of the things that we thought we could come up with and kind of self-impose is touching up. We know that there's standards that you guys have for certain things that are in certain code and certain rules, but one of the things that we wanted to do was self-impose rules and regulations and fines on ourselves, right? So if there's something that you don't like, we pay attention to detail quite a bit, and we're pretty intense as far as protecting our brand and making sure that everything that we have is up to par and beyond that, if you will. So a self-imposed fine of $1,000 after the first offense. And again, this is all something that we could maybe discuss and how we determine what's the first offense, what's the second offense, and what's the third offense. But you can see that the fines are pretty steep. I'd be happy to have my counsel draw up paperwork and again, have that approved by you guys and go from there. But and then again, the third offense occurs. If there's ever a third offense, we would pay you the $5,000, and then we would basically put up the wall-mounted sign that Geneva has throughout, I guess, the city. And that's really about it.
Dave, do you want to?
If the commission has any questions for
questions?
the applicant, but we do have a staff report we'd like to present to.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Could you explain how this came to pass, that this sign, what was the process by which you ended up painting this sign with it not complying with Geneva's code to begin with?
It was a misunderstanding. We weren't aware of, when I spoke with, I believe her name was Kathleen. It was just a misunderstanding on my behalf that I didn't realize that you could not put a sign directly onto the wall. I mean, that's really all I can tell you. That it was just a misunderstanding.
Sydney?
Her name's Kathleen Tomasenko, and she contacted you on August 31st, 2017, and you never really got back to her
I spoke to her on the phone.
after the fact.
No, before the fact, and what I did, if I can recall exactly not exactly, but somewhat the way that the conversation went was, for some reason, again, it was a misunderstanding. I was picturing figures of a mural, people being drawn onto a mural, not necessarily a sign. So again, I did speak to her over the phone, but again, it was a misunderstanding.
Need some explanation from David.
Yes, Fred?
When this sign was, well, let me back up here a second. A question for staff. Can you explain, maybe you can or can't, how a permit of occupancy was issued if this sign was in violation of the sign ordinance?
Well, we didn't hold up the occupancy because the applicant, sorry, I can move the Christmas decoration. We did not hold up the occupancy. We did issue the applicant a violation notice, and they responded to that notice by properly filing a request to amend the city ordinance. So we did not hold up occupancy while this consideration was taking place. They agreed that they would rectify the violation if, the ruling was not in their favor.
Okay. All right.
Is it a temporary certificate of occupancy or permanent at this point?
I would have to double check that. Do you know offhand if it was a temporary CO or final?
I don't know.
Are we just talking about the wording, the lettering on the building? We're not talking about anything that has to do with the rest of the facade having been painted?
Correct, and I think that's where some of the misunderstanding occurred is early in conversations months ago, we understood that there was a desire to do a mural. And that's when Kathleen reached out and said, if you're going to do a mural on the building, we need to meet and understand what's going on. And then the last contact we had, I think it was the mural's going to be on the inside, which there is a mural on the inside, and what's on the outside is more striping or whatever you want to call it. And they did that without a permit, not realizing you couldn't paint the letters directly on the building either.
So there's nothing to prevent them from doing the colorful part of the building anyway? That they could do without any permit?
Correct. We don't require a permit to paint buildings.
So we're here to discuss the CU and all of the verbiage above the door, and they were not even allowed to do the hand-painted address, the 211? Is that part of this discussion as well?
And that's not considered a sign, so.
Okay, so that's just the address, which could be painted on a building.
Yeah, it's just-
So
it's the
purely
logo
the
and the words.
CU and the craft urban
That's
food
correct.
cocktails.
The logo.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what are the ramifications of what's being requested?
I guess I have a few slides I'd like to
Okay, great.
kind of go through, if that's okay.
That's
If there's
fine.
no
Any other questions for the applicant before? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Cindy.
If you're not, clear on this type of thing, how will we know that you'll be clear on whatever fines are imposed? And how will we know that when we say that this is falling apart, that you'll understand that we mean it's falling apart?
Well, to answer your first question, this is one of my, one of the things as far as me learning, right, how the process here in Geneva. And so as far as being clear and understanding where we are, I would absolutely be in constant communication to make sure that everything is rectified and buttoned up, right? So we are working on getting a patio because we have patio space. And so again, kind of a side note, I'm making sure that I'm talking to David or whoever I may have to on every single step of the way to make sure that we have everything under control and understood. That way we don't run into this problem, right? So that's how I would understand as far as where we are. And can you clarify what you mean by falling apart?
Well, what I mean is that you're talking about how if there's anything wrong with the paint or if there's anything wrong with the sign, that you'll fix it. You talked about how it's no chip and how.
So we have the artist on retainer, and he will come into the city of Geneva up to 3 times a year to fix anything that happens. But again, that's something I understand that you guys, the city, is pretty vigilant as far as, any sort of sign degradation or any building degradation. And as soon as you would call us, I would assume that you would give me 3 to 5 days to get it fixed, and we would do that.
Okay, because the other problem is this is in the historic preservation end of town, and this is really kind of important.
Absolutely.
And
Well, my background's in branding, right? So I want to make sure that I do protect brand quite a bit, and my brand would matter a lot in this instance. And by no means would I want somebody to walk up to the building and see a sign that isn't up to par and say, it's revenue out of my pocket. And I just wouldn't let that happen. So hopefully that answers your question.
because it's our town.
Listen, I'm part of this community too now, right? And I don't want to do anything. If anything, I want to bring, more revenue into the city. And so by no means do I want to do anything that's going to hurt the city or the community.
And any other questions?
If it comes up, can we ask questions after the
Yeah,
presentation?
yeah, I mean, David's just going to
Yeah.
walk through some things with the Historic Preservation Commission. All right, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Does their neighbor feel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a PowerPoint I'm going to pull up here. Obviously, we're here tonight because there was a mix-up and there was a sign installed without a permit. But just out of fairness to the applicant, that's the only hiccup we've really had along the way. And they've been cooperative once they were made aware of the violation, and have petitioned the city for this change and are willing to accept the ruling. So the request is simply not to allow signs, or to remove the restrictions of allowing signs painted directly on the buildings. I think we're all clear that we're just talking about the text and the logo, and that the rest of this doesn't really contain a commercial message and is not considered part of the sign. I don't know if you remember Nosh, but that facade is actually painted. It's just painted a very neutral color, a kind of a brick tone. But the signs themselves were not painted. They were wall-mounted signs on the building. So that's the section of the zoning ordinance that lists painted signs as prohibited. One of the reasons we prohibit painted signs is because as tenants change over, they get painted over and over and over, and then long-term maintenance with subsequent signs can become an issue, and just kind of a maintenance issue and an eyesore. But there's other concerns too. There's the ongoing maintenance that we've been talking about, the flaking paint. If even using high-quality paint, there's routine and meticulous touch-up. But really, one of the major concerns is that it seals the mortar. It masks the mortar, and brick surfaces are porous. They have moisture, and they breeze out through the mortar. So when you seal that, you're trapping moisture within the surface, and if it can't escape, it'll kind of find its way out, and you can see it bubbling up through the paint. But in addition to damaging the paint, the long-term impacts could actually damage the integrity of the material of that wall, and then you might be replacing original brick instead of just painting over the surface. Now, obviously that has to do with more than just signs, because you can paint the entire surface that's not a sign without a permit, and we can't really stop that. Sorry, the last point on that is that once you paint a surface, it's really hard to go back. You can power wash it off, blast it off. That's the fastest way to do it, but you can damage the material when you do that. Some chemical treatments can be harmful too. To do it right is really time-consuming and expensive, and it's not often done for that reason. So yeah, again, we're talking about painting signs. We don't have a permit requirement to paint the exterior of buildings in the historic district. The way we do historic preservation in Geneva, everything is permit-driven. So we don't do like a certificate of appropriateness before you submit a permit. So if it doesn't require a permit, the Historic Preservation Commission doesn't review it, doesn't comment on it. So if it's not a sign, you can paint the whole thing. Signs do require a permit, so we would have the ability to review signs and then prohibit painted signs. One of the reasons so we don't regulate the painting of buildings, but we try to discourage it through our design guidelines. The HPC adopted design guidelines in 2010. One of the goals is to maintain historic materials and original configuration of storefronts. Obviously, if you're painting over and potentially damaging masonry, long-term, that's a common mistake. I'm not going to go through each of these standards in detail, but when the HPC considers cases, they review it against 10 Secretary of the Interior standards. Many of them speak to retaining the original materials, protecting them, in their original form to the greatest extent possible. So we've found at least half of them are applicable in this case when you're painting over the material. So the HPC considered this back in November. We presented a few different options for them to consider as part of the request. One could be to simply just allow signs to be painted on the exterior walls of buildings. The second option would be to amend the sign regulations to only allow signs to be painted if the surface had been previously painted, so you're not doing further damage. The third was to amend the sign ordinance to allow signs to be painted on a surface of the building only if it was intended to be painted, so wood, stucco, but not masonry or stone surfaces. And then the fourth option was to just uphold the ordinance as it's written today. And that is where the HPC landed with their recommendation, was to just uphold the prohibition that's in the ordinance today. I know everybody's had their reports and their minutes. I can try to summarize any of the points in there, but I think what it boiled down to for the HPC was kind of the slippery slope. I don't think they really saw the harm in painting over an already painted surface. But that if we started allowing that, is that a loophole where people would start painting the facade of a building in a similar fashion and then paint over the sign, and kind of the door's cracked open now because we don't require a permit to paint buildings, but it would crack the door open further by removing this restriction. So if there's any questions on any part of that, I'd be happy to go back and go through it.
Can I ask you another question?
Sure.
Has anybody else been denied a permit, say within the last couple of years?
We actually have a permit on hold right now because we had denied it, and then this occurred, and they're wondering why this was allowed, but theirs was denied. So that's kind of been a hold pattern to see what the outcome of this is.
What about before that, though?
It's come up, not frequently. I mean, it periodically. I want to say I'm aware of 2 over the last few years.
This is in the historic district, but is it a historical building considered by the city?
This portion is not. This was actually not originally a street-facing facade, but the rest of the building, it's all connected.
Okay.
Facing 3rd Street was the primary facade. And I guess it's important to note that this regulation is not specific to the historic district. It's citywide, that we don't allow painted signs in buildings.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't understand the harm in painting a sign on a building that is already painted. I certainly understand the harm in painting a building, the masonry building that does not have paint on it. But if it's already painted, what's the difference between painting a sign on it and just repainting it with another color of paint that you liked better, or a geometric design like this has?
I think the only difference there would really be frequency, because you can paint the entire facade of a building with resilient paint, and it might have a 10-year warranty, but not every tenant has a 10-year warranty, where tenants might turn over more frequently, and then you're painting over that surface more frequently. But also, I don't think every tenant would want to paint their sign. I think this is part of Craft Urban's brand and kind of their image. I don't know that would be something everybody would do, would paint over and paint another sign. They might install a wall-mounted sign.
Yeah, John.
Is it possible, if we were to be amenable to allowing cases of painting signs directly on building walls. Is it possible for them to meet certain requirements, but for that, each sign that's done for, that it gets approved on a case-by-case basis? It depends on what the neighbor looks, what it's gonna look like on that wall and what area of town and everything else. Could we set it up so it had to be approved by the sign, which is us, I guess, the Plan Commission for signs? For painted sign on walls on a case-by-case basis.
We do have the ability to grant sign variations, but I don't think the type of sign is one of those variation types. Actually, I'll pull it up here to make sure I'm not giving bad information.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at options 2 and 3, where it's if the wall had previously been painted prior to the adoption of an ordinance, and then the 3 was if the wall was made of a material intended to be painted. If you kind of combine those, if you said if it was made of a material which was intended to be painted or had been painted prior to the adoption of these revisions, and then subsequent and approved by the Plan Commission at its, on a case-by-case basis.
Well, I think you'd want to set some criteria for that case-by-case basis because
Because that's a slippery slope as well.
Right. I mean, sign regulations have to be content neutral. So that's, we look at size, height, materials, lighting, but we can't look at what the content of that message is, of what the sign is. So if we don't like the way it looks, we can't deny it on that basis.
Well, then we ought to go back to the painting issue because I don't like the paint. We could go there if you really want to get that specific.
But the paint, we can only talk about in the context of a sign, not the building wall, because the city doesn't regulate that now, right?
Right, well then I'm thinking we should go back and regulate that maybe.
That's the part that's frustrating for me, is we're just talking about this little square on the building rather than the whole side of the building, So I wish we would be talking about whether you can put murals on walls rather than just the sign, because...
So why did, Kathleen said that when originally she thought there was going to be a mural on the outside of the building, that she would have to in some way review the content of the mural, but once it became not a mural, just a design, then that all goes away?
That was why we reached out, as we had heard the intent was to paint a mural on the outside of the building, and a mural can be many different things, but we wanted to make sure that, if the mural showed people eating food and drinking a beer or whatever, that would be a commercial message. That's an advertisement of what is occurring inside of the building. So we wanted to be clear on what the mural was, and is it a sign or is it artistic? And in this case, those lines aren't communicating a commercial message. They're certainly attention grabbing, but I don't see it as much different than turquoise or pink buildings on State Street.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And they can paint it.
So if it was a mural that was purely artistic, it was a forest scene or something like that, a bunch of trees, then that would be fine, even if they were done in a style that nobody liked.
We don't have that specifically defined in our code, but I think that this issue has kind of brought that to light. It might be something we need to look into.
Right.
Okay.
Is it worth talking about, somebody mentioned, I don't know if it was Cindy or whatever, maybe it was you, David, that the issue of having it on the sign is maintenance and then having to paint an entire surface. Is it worth exploring, if you're going to paint a sign on a building, if we go down that road, having it bordered in a way, and I think the CU on here is bordered somehow, I don't know if that's raised brick or something, or if this tenant left, you could arguably paint just inside that surface, with a neutral color or something as you change tenants to allow the installation of a surface sign or an additional wall sign. Somehow border it off so you're not dealing with an entire wall. Somebody leaves and you've got this, maybe have a sign restriction. Does it comply with the sign restriction? But in a way that it can be somehow addressed if a tenant vacates.
Yeah, this sign does comply with the other regulations in terms of lighting, sign area. The only violation is that it's painted directly on the surface, and I guess I would hesitate to do that because not every building has a clear sign panel.
Right.
So David, are they able to get relief on a variance request?
They are not. There's 5 types of variations that the Plan Commission can consider for signs. To increase the allowable area, the allowable height of a freestanding sign, to increase the number by not more than 1. To permit a wall sign, awning sign, or canopy sign to be displayed on a secondary facade, and then to vary requirements for electronic message board signs. So that's the authority that the Plan Commission has to consider sign variations. We could just conceivably consider others.
Correct.
It seems on the maintenance side of this that the party that is really likely to suffer is the owner of the building, because if the tenant leaves and the building is not attractive to future tenants because of the way it's painted and he has to remove it, or because the masonry's been damaged and there's the cost of
Fixing
repair
it,
and all
yeah.
that, all of that goes back to the owner of the building. Does the city have any recourse to that owner to enforce some kind of maintenance of the mortar, or whatever has been damaged?
We do, and that's standard property maintenance. We do routine drive-throughs of the city every year, and we issue between 50 and 100 notices of peeling paint every year. And that's residential or commercial, so we're routinely tracking that.
And how many get fixed?
The majority of them do. Some people need more time to get it done than others, but I don't think we have the same 50 every year. We usually find quadrants that we try to focus our efforts on and go through the city kind of slowly with those issues.
So if they were to not be able to have this sign and put up some type of a different sign that's not painted, they could still paint the rest of the building as often as they chose.
Right. And that's I guess the loophole or the consideration that we went kind of round and round with the HPC on. To be able to stop people from painting that surface, we would need to really redo the way we operate and require a certificate of appropriateness before, for any exterior change, before a permit is filed. That means a residential homeowner, if they want to paint their house, they've got to come and get a certificate of appropriateness before they can do that. And I think that would be a big change for the city.
Does the certificate, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mike, of appropriateness, I know we don't have it, but would that consider like neighbors and things like that too? Or is that just purely like we don't have swear words and things like that, appropriateness?
A certificate of appropriateness is more than just for the signage. It's for any improvements to the exterior, and it's not really focused on. It's not a public hearing. I mean, it's not reaching out to neighbors and saying, "Do you like the paint color?" or anything like that.
Sorry, your back's to me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just wondering, we have these, we have that, do we have one building after another that could be a mural going down 3rd Street? But we're only allowed to look at, is that appropriate? We're not allowed to say, okay, no, there's a mural here, there's a mural.
With the commission, the appropriateness would be, are you damaging historic materials? So they would probably recommend against painting the surface at all if it's not already painted, and not issue the certificate of appropriateness. They wouldn't be focused so much on the message or the content of the mural as it is the damaging of the material.
Got it.
And is that the primary reason for prohibiting painted signs now, is damaging the material?
Right. The Historic Preservation Commission, their recommendation, they also reviewed the sign regulations. That these were adopted in 2011 or 12. They recommended prohibiting them at that time for those concerns, that once it's painted over and over and over again.
I'm sorry, who recommended that?
The Historic Preservation Commission. I mean, it was an ordinance that was drafted by staff with the input of the commission and the Plan Commission, and forwarded to the council.
So how does this discussion, though, relate to the historical district? This is really not, this building is in the district, but this discussion isn't really limited to that.
Right.
can you explain why it can't be limited to the historic district? Whatever, if we were to change the rules in some way, why you could just say within the historic district you have to have this certificate of appropriateness or
Well, the
something?
certificate of appropriateness would be just for the historic district.
Oh, I thought you said it could be for anybody.
I'm sorry, there's kind of it's a can of worms, but the sign regulation, the prohibition on painted signs applies citywide. To get a certificate of appropriateness from the Historic Preservation Commission, that would only apply to the historic district. That wouldn't apply outside of the district.
So could we say that a sign could be painted on a building that was already painted with a certificate of or no, let's take that back. Could we say painting any building in the historic district that wasn't meant to be painted originally, like you said, with the wood or the stucco?
Materials weren't.
Yeah, would require a certificate of appropriateness, which would include both a painted sign and anything else that might be painted on the building, like a mural or just
I think
paint color.
that would be the step that we would need to take if we wanted to stop buildings from being painted with either brick or stone surfaces. But that is a drastic change to the way we've done preservation for the 30 years it's been in place. And it would require then any homeowner doing any exterior work, whether it's painting or gutter changes or anything, to have to come and get a certificate of appropriateness first.
I thought you said it could only be for the historic.
Any homeowner in the historic district.
Oh, okay.
That's where
Okay.
we got mixed up before. Okay.
I'm worried about my plans for next year.
You'll be okay. Your house is new.
You already got the pink paint.
Architect
So was
regulated
this
already.
considered appropriate?
This did not have a permit issued because they did not apply for a sign permit. That's kind of why we're here. Had they applied for a sign permit, it would have been denied because it's a prohibited sign.
But painting the building design would have been, doesn't
It
require
doesn't
a permit,
require
they
a
could do
permit,
that
so-
anyway.
Right. I mean, there's other buildings like Doggy Divine's been painted that didn't require a permit. All Chocolate Kitchen was painted that didn't require a permit. I mean, painting doesn't require a permit. It was the fact that they painted the sign, and signs do require a permit.
Seems like the lesser impact thing is the sign than what color people choose to paint the entire building.
That's what I'm,
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
We're regulating the thing that doesn't make as much difference.
Can I ask the applicant a question? If it ended up that the sign was prohibited, what would, have you thought about what you would do? Would you replicate this on raised metal letters so it looks the same, but it's 6 inches off the wall, or?
Yes, so we would essentially paint over what is there now and put up a drill into the building or whatever the procedures are that are allowed. We would raise, letters to basically get the point
Try to
across.
replicate this as much as you could?
Yeah. But again, we'd be painting over, so adding another coat to it and putting a
Understood.
sign on top of it, right? So we've got, that kind of where we're looking for, we're forward thinking and have people in place to get that done. But should this not be allowed?
I guess if those are the 5 reasons we can allow variances, I mean, aren't we kind of obligated to vote this down and let the variances, let that code be changed?
Well,
That is what we're talking about.
that is the request, is he's asking to change the rules to allow this type of sign because they could not apply for a variation.
I see.
If we were to decide that we wanted to, because to me, what seems to make sense is either to change it to the point where you have some control over the painting of the entire building, including whether or not there's a sign, or to go with the rules we already have. Because to just regulate this small piece that is the sign doesn't make a lot of sense to me, maintenance-wise or appearance-wise or impact on the district-wise. But if we were to choose to go that way, to change the rules pretty drastically, I wouldn't want to make a decision tonight. It would have to be referred back to staff to come up with some way to do that. I mean, I wouldn't know offhand how to word that, or what it should include and what it shouldn't. It gets more complicated than we can deal with this evening, I would think.
That would take some, studying, because there's, I think everybody that lives in the historic district or has operated a business here or owns property has been accustomed to the way we do things
Yeah.
now. So it would be a pretty big educational process to change that.
That's what I would think.
Yeah, you're basically entering into routine maintenance now. So it's not a significant enhancement of your property or obviously a new construction. It's, I want to maintain my property and now I got to get a permit to maintain it. So it kind of changes the tone, if you will.
Yeah, I can see that it's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
It should be a little more cumbersome within the historic district, though, for a property owner. I think the expectation when you acquire or own a property in the historic district is that there are more hoops to jump through to do anything with your property, right? So.
Yeah, but you're not going to paint a sign on your own house.
No, but if you wanted to paint the house and you don't want to come in and get, whoops, my phone, and get permission for the color that you've selected, right now you don't have to do that.
And I guess I would disagree slightly with that statement. I don't think it should be more cumbersome to be in a historic district. I think there's an expectation that, the character is maintained in the historic district, but there shouldn't be additional permit requirements in a district. So if we actually went through this about a decade ago with windows. We were trying to enforce our design guidelines on window repair instead of replacement.
Right.
But we did not at the time require permits for windows, and it became a pretty big case. And now we do require permits for windows throughout the city, so we can review windows for historic preservation.
Okay.
But at the time, we lost the case because we couldn't penalize or have an additional hoop or whatever you want to call it to jump
Right.
through in the district.
Okay.
So you're saying that we couldn't change the rules just in the historic district, and it would apply to anybody anywhere in the city who wanted to paint their house?
If we wanted to require a permit to paint your house,
It has to
it
be
would have to be
everywhere.
citywide. But if we
Everywhere.
wanted to control, be able to issue a certificate of appropriateness or not for painting the exterior buildings in the historic district, it would not be tied to a permit. It would happen before a permit's applied for.
Okay, so we don't have to impose another permit on homeowners in the district. We just have this certificate of appropriateness process.
Right.
That they would have to file some paperwork.
Right.
Well, further, could you delineate between commercial and residential?
Yeah, I was wondering.
Because commercial, there's maybe a higher likelihood that there'll be more creative things that want to be done by an owner versus a homeowner going from a white house to a yellow house.
I don't think, you have to have some good justification for that, and I don't think that would.
For just addressing it on commercial
I think in
buildings.
theory, yeah, but there's I have
A lot of houses that are
very
commercial
creative
buildings.
homeowner on my block.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think that would. I don't know if that'd be an appropriate place to draw the line.
Right.
Well, I think what just continues to make it difficult is to me anyway, there's a disconnect, between not having painted signs because they're paint, but yet we can paint those materials even though it's not a sign. And I think that's what I struggle with.
I think that's what we've struggled with on a staff level, and that's what the HPC was struggling with too. And I think where they landed was the doors kind of cracked open now, but this is just pushing it open a little bit further, and allowing signs to be painted over these historic materials.
Yeah, from my consideration, I would say that it's in all context, the paint and the sign and everything. So if businesses can do that, they're going to see more of it. You're going to see, more, we'll call them mural signs, where people will just have a composition because it draws your eye, and then their sign. And so that will become pretty much standard.
And there might be a potential for a bigger variation in quality of painted signs on walls versus the professionally done versus
Yeah, you'll get varying
a
qualities
business owner
too.
right.
But that'll be sort of like, again, it's almost like an arms race, right? So once it starts becoming,
Right.
you know, that's, again, its visibility is is the key.
If it
And
was only on buildings that are already painted, do
yeah,
we care?
that's a
Yes,
good
we
question.
do.
That's something that I wanted to ask as far as, do we know how many, what's that universe? Is it 3 buildings? Is it 4 buildings that are already painted? I mean, because I understand if it were 100 buildings that were already painted, and then you allow this to happen, then there's a bigger risk there, right? So I guess it's dependent on, you know, how many is it 1, is it 2, is it 3, is it Craft Urban, Doggy Divine, and All Chocolate Kitchen? Or are there more buildings that are already painted that could fall into the spectrum?
Do you know? Any idea?
No, well, the number of them, I don't know. I couldn't tell you exactly without a survey.
Yeah, that's too many.
That's, just wanted to
Yeah.
just ask that question.
Okay.
And if we did it just on buildings that were already painted and the ordinance was changed, does that mean we have to go and do an inventory? Because how do you know when a building, 10 years from now, when was that building painted? You'd have to be on your
You'd have to have a list.
list.
You have
What was
that,
painted in
and then you still have the loophole of not requiring a permit for paint.
Paint.
So,
Right. But then, so you'd have
They said
you'd
it
have to
had
have a
been-
list and
it
say,
had
well,
been
yours,
permitted-
you
had
must have
been
painted it
painted
after
before a
January
certain date.
2018.
Right.
Yep.
Right, it's only those that are painted as of now, say. You couldn't,
Right.
so there wouldn't be the incentive, well, I'm going to run out and paint my building because then I could paint a sign on, because you still couldn't paint
yeah, and
the
I
sign.
mean, I don't know how big that risk is. I don't know how many people would paint an entire facade that hasn't been previously painted just so they could paint the sign, unless.
Let's not
you
find
know,
out.
I'm just saying, I don't know what the risk is. We definitely have buildings, you know, I mean, if you just start at Even Flow and go south, all those are brick facades that could be painted. The Fargo Theater, Little Owl, those are all unpainted historic materials that we'd like to see preserved. But then we do have a number of buildings that have already been painted in Nosh and All Chocolate Kitchen and the new Nosh location and Doggy Divine, you know. Those
But there's
examples.
nothing protecting those unpainted buildings from being painted.
Right.
So they can go out and paint them however they want, regardless of, I mean, under the current code and permitting.
So, in my opinion, I think we keep the ordinance as is unless we decide we're going to do COs for paint. That's my own opinion. In the historic district.
I kind of feel like we're looking to break the ice here a little bit. Being forced into changing it after the fact, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right to me. I feel like, you know, if there was, you know, I understand the misunderstanding, and I appreciate that. But being forced into this decision rather than saying, I'd like to do this, can we do it up front as part of the development of the restaurant? Just doesn't really feel right to me. So I'm more likely, I think, to uphold the current code.
I'm definitely to uphold the current code because I feel like we've been mocked and I don't appreciate it. And I believe our laws and I believe our ordinances have been totally mocked and totally disregarded.
No, I don't think, Cindy, I don't think we've been mocked. I
Oh,
think-
we have.
Well, it's more of, we're left holding the bag.
Yeah.
And
we're gonna keep holding
way to
it.
put it. Yeah, I mean, through a series of missteps with the city and the applicant, we have been left with, to make a decision that is not clearly defined. And not good.
It's not only not clearly defined, but it has really broad implications.
Yes.
Yes.
And I feel like, considering it for this instance, in making a decision tonight to allow it, with it just seems like we haven't been thoughtful enough. If we want to make this change, this should be studied, and the staff should come back with more, more material and a recommendation to us based on, they've done a lot of work here. You've talked to 15 other cities or 22 cities and got 15 responses or whatever it was. You are not sitting on your hands. It just feels like it's a broader issue. And I don't, sitting here, I don't know the implications for owners, for developers and neighbors of folks that could be impacted, so.
Well, I'm not happy with the way the whole process works now, what is allowed and what isn't. To me, it doesn't make any sense that you can paint a building in pretty much any way you want, even if it's in a historic district, even if it's made of material that was never painted before, never intended to be painted, but then you can't, on an already painted building, paint a sign that is in every other way conforms to our sign code. To me, that doesn't make any sense. But I would want to see this change be part of a broader, more thorough analysis of what would be the best way to do this. So I guess I would not be in favor of doing this in a hurried, but based on one incident case, but would want to look at this and think that the city staff and the historic preservation folks ought to give some serious thought to whether there's a better way to ensure that our masonry buildings are handled as in the best way possible to maintain them.
Right.
And not to penalize those people who have businesses in already painted buildings in a way that doesn't seem to me to be detracting from the neighborhood or from the condition of the building itself, just by regulating the sign portion.
I agree completely. Feels like we're being reactive, not proactive, so.
Right, but there is something here that ought to be
Right.
proactively investigated.
Yeah. Right. Agreed.
Anybody else?
Just has the issue of painted signs been talked about recently, or has it come up in terms of, for discussion, as to whether they should continue to be prohibited or allowed?
And I can't think of an instance where it has. I think when the sign regulations prior to 2011 were very brief. So we tried to do a very comprehensive review and discussion with the business community, with the Preservation Commission, Plan Commission. At that time, it was decided that painted signs should not be allowed. Since then, like I said, I think we've only had one or two that have actually wanted to do it, and then the one that has. We've had some discussion about murals, but the ones that we do have, like the Lincoln Highway mural here on 2nd Street, that's not painted on the building, that's painted on another surface that's affixed to the building. Yeah, so to answer the question briefly, no. Yeah.
Thanks.
Outside of cost, what is really the impact here? I mean, you're going to create a sign that looks exactly the same and replace it over the painted wall already. So why wouldn't we just stick with what we have and then, like you've been saying, talk about this more as whether we should be regulating it? I mean, I think we all, or at least I feel, I shouldn't say all, but we should be talking about the whole side of the building.
I think if that's really the intent, that's a much broader policy discussion because, like I said, it does really change the way preservation has operated, and we need to come to terms with it if we want to make that change or not.
I just don't think there's any real substantial impact to the applicant because it's going to look the same. It's just going to cost a little more money to do from where we are right now.
Do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move to close the public hearing.
Second?
Moved and seconded.
Commissioner Mead?
Aye.
Commissioner Slivka?
Aye.
Commissioner Evans?
Aye.
Commissioner Leidig?
Aye.
Commissioner Case?
Aye.
Commissioner Kozrog?
I want to make sure what we're voting aye or nay on here real quick.
Closing the public.
Closing the public hearing, oh, okay. Aye. Sorry,
Chairman Stocking?
confused there for a second.
Aye.
7-0.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion. The motions have to be in a positive sense.
Correct.
I'd like to make a motion for a zoning ordinance text amendment to section 11-12-9 to remove signs painted directly on the surface of any exterior wall of any building from the list of prohibited signs.
That's it. I don't think there are
Nothing
any
to
conditions
attach.
or anything else that's on there.
I'll second that.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Oh,
All right. Commissioner Mead?
Nay.
Commissioner Slivka?
Nay.
Commissioner Evans?
Nay.
Commissioner Leidig?
Nay.
Commissioner Case?
Nay.
Commissioner Kozrog?
Nay.
Chairman Stocking?
nay.
7 noes.
7-0, okay. That's our recommendation of the council, so I don't know when it's going to go to council.
It would go on January 8th.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it, yep. All right, next item on the agenda is for site plan review. Fabyan Crossing Site Plan Amendment to Ordinance 1993-45 and 2003-20 related to the modifications to the approved landscaping building elevation of the site plan for Lot 1. The location is 2100 South Randall Road, and the applicant is Bob Moran of Parkway Construction and Associates.
Glad we got another tank.
Sounds like they give
Not a big thing.
Hi, I'm Bob Moran. I'm
Sounds like home.
with Parkway Architects. I didn't know I was making a presentation tonight, but I did submit the material, so I'm here to answer questions.
Could you explain what it is that you'd like to do?
My client is at home, and they do, they're a retailer of home decor. So lamps, pillows, anything that you put in the house. They sell a small amount of furniture, but they're not a furniture store. So it's, anything you might put in the house. Our client would like to remodel the Gander Mountain, Bill Gander Mountain Randall Road. And so I guess it's just got each of the slides here. You want me to go through those?
Just whatever you need to show and to talk about, but maybe at least put up your elevation. Just go down, yeah.
Table of contents
Is that on
there on
here?
the left.
Yeah, I
There's a lawsuit.
More. And you have to reduce the size a little bit
Yes,
for
we
that.
will. Yeah, we could probably make that look better. Okay. All right, how do I get rid of that?
That's all right. We can see from there.
Can you see it okay? All right, so I'm not sure why that, oh, I see. So the old Gander Mountain had a front entry on it. Our client is doing these stores all over the country, so they have their own branding element, which is their front entry, which is a house with a shadow house behind it. That's We typically go through and renovate the interior, demo out most everything, make all of the restrooms compliant, and redo the store itself. It's an open sales floor concept, and they don't really store anything. They've got a limited area that they use for receiving their merchandise, and then they get it out on the floor. Their idea is if they can't get it out on the floor for you to buy, then they can't sell it, so. The building itself is kind of tucked in, kind of a hillside a little bit, so it sits down in the ground. So if you were to see this, this is the back of the building. And so at the corner here of this building is only like 8 feet from the ground level. Whereas at the front of the building, it's got a parapet height of 26.5 feet. So it's kind of an unusual spot. Anyway, so this is the typical design that At Home likes to put on our stores. And, but I think we were presenting what we needed to do for the site plan. So, site plan review. So we typically come in and we comply with whatever city ordinances there are for the site itself. In this case, we're operating under a PUD. So we took it, we looked at that PUD and worked with Paul to try and understand what that PUD was, because our client is basically wanting to comply with whatever that PUD says. That changes from site to site. So in this case, there was originally a planting plan that we said, okay, we will remove anything that's dead or dying and replace it. And if something is missing that was originally in that plan, we'll replant it. So we had a licensed landscape architect assess the site and go through and look at all of the plantings that are there compared to what the plan was that was provided by the city. And so we said, okay, well, this is what we found, what was missing, it was dying or needs to be replaced, and presented a landscape plan that filled that gap, we hope. But generally, that's it. So I'm here to answer questions.
Okay, I see 3 requests, and you're amending building elevations, you're amending the final landscape plan, and amending the final site plan for various ordinances. What specifically are you doing? Are you going to reskin the building, and what of that reskinning requires an approval? Is that the parapet height on the entrance that goes to?
So no, the parapet height exists.
Okay.
The building itself, the only thing that's different on this building is the color of it, the front entry, and there is sunshade devices, those little what looks like a dash line on the front.
Yep.
Okay. We're adding some icon lights that, those are the blue lights that are up above those.
Sure.
They're sconces is what they are.
Okay.
So there's a little light that'll shine up and down, but it doesn't shine out. The rest of that facade is painted, which
So the material will stay the same?
the materials.
You're just changing the color?
At the moment, the Gander Mountain has a kind of a colonnade on the front.
Right.
With a large wood beam structure.
Right.
We're removing all of that. It also had a wood cladding for the length of that, which we will be removing.
Okay.
So,
So-
with the addition of the new front entry, we're offsetting it slightly from what Gander Mountain
Sure.
had. So it's,
And I'm looking at a landscape plan on that, there's, and I did not go through and compare plants and numbers and varieties, but it sounds like you're restoring the landscape plan on your parcel to the plan that was originally intended as approved.
that's our understanding, yes.
Okay. All right, and not changing plant types or anything else, or
No, that's,
removing any overgrown ones to put new ones in that are a little, gives you more visibility, or no?
There'll probably be some pruning on some of the.
Sure.
Some of there's some the landscape architect said there's some undergrowth under some of
Right.
those trees.
Right,
Needs cleaning up. So we typically do that.
right. And staff recommends approval of this. The materials seem appropriate, the intent of the landscape changes seem,
I think the primary thing is we'd had approved this plan through the ordinances and resolutions we have, and it was specific of what they have, so we have to come back and make those changes through the site plan, because they're minor things that could be approved this way, but they have to go through this process.
they're not moving islands, changing parking spaces or
No,
anything else.
it's really quite minor.
It's pretty, it seemed fairly pedestrian.
And new tenant.
Yeah.
New tenants.
Similar to what we considered for the Wendy's on Kirk Road, their site plan change.
Right. Right.
Similar to what we considered previously in the center for the Burlington Coat Factory and Fresh Time. That also included a public hearing portion, though, because they were changing the sign regulations at that time.
Okay. And then awaiting us this evening was an emailed letter dated yesterday. How should we incorporate that into our thinking process? The fact that there's a conflict between two adjacent owners in a lawsuit, I don't know if that affects how we view the changes here.
And my recommendation is that it shouldn't. I look at the agreement they have amongst owners in the center, similar to like covenants and restrictions in a subdivision.
Right, absolutely.
They might restrict fences in backyards, but the city's regulations allow for it, so we'll issue the permit.
Right.
We're not responsible for enforcing their private agreements.
There's a place for this to be settled.
Yeah.
And it's not with the planning.
Not the
That's
commission.
in process.
Agreed.
Any other questions, comments?
Comments from the public?
Anybody from the public wants to speak? Yes, sir. If I may? Yes.
I'm Craig Whitehead of the Crown Group, 1564 West Algonquin Road, Hoffman Estates. We are the owners of the Dominics.
Okay, good.
The Dominics and the Fresh Time are now stopped. His client has sued us over what we think are some very minor issues relating to a document that was prepared for the original Venture store 27 years ago, basically to extort us. So we're stopped. The grocery store was supposed to open up in July. Burlington was supposed to open up in April. So we're on hold till a judge can make a decision. Obviously, it's kind of in the judge's hands, but I wanted to be here tonight. If any of you have any questions, if you want to know more, I'm happy to answer them.
It's a private matter. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion.
Very good.
I'd like to request the Fabyan Crossing Site Plan Amendment to ordinances 1993-45 and 2003-20 related to modifications to the approved landscaping, building elevations, and site plan for Lot 1 be approved as presented in the plan, in the staff report.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
All right. Commissioner Mead?
Aye.
Commissioner Slivka?
Aye.
Commissioner Evans?
Aye.
Commissioner Leidig?
Aye.
Commissioner Case?
Aye.
Commissioner Kasserag?
Aye.
Chairman Stocking?
Aye.
7-0.
Very good.
This again would go to the 8th of January.
January 8th for our council. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, so, yes, go up.
Quick update is we are not expecting to have a meeting on the 28th of December. We have nothing noticed for that meeting. We are expecting in January, David's been working with Land Cache, the changes to updating the subdivision regulations, so that's going to be coming in January, and we do expect to see the library in January too. So both of
Really?
those. Both of those would be coming. It goes to HPC and December 19th next week. And then at this point, so our expectation is that we would see it in January.
Look pretty much the same that they presented as part of the proposal for getting approval from the voters.
And there's been tweaks along the way, and this is our second round of review. There's been some site plan changes, but I think overall the building.
Basic concept
Yeah,
design is pretty much the
pretty
same.
much the same.
Good, good. Excellent. All right.
Let you know that, the plan that we talked about, the concept for the Marquette, that plan will be moving, they expect to make a submittal on that plan in January.
Great.
Too, so they looking forward to doing a plan that's with the mixed-use townhomes and apartments and single-family clustered homes. So anyway, so that's another plan that you'll see out there.
Great.
And that's all I had.
I have a question. You know, the public hearing we had on Craft Urban, I'd just like to get an idea from staff, you know, how are we going to proceed with this? Do you have any thoughts about it?
Well, I think this has highlighted an issue that really, I think All Chocolate Kitchen was painted while I was here without a permit, and that kind of raised some eyebrows, but nothing really boiled up enough. But I think it's highlighted a loophole or a concern, and I think it will be a challenge to figure out. I don't have an answer on how to solve it. I don't have a recommendation on how to solve it, because I do think that revamping the way preservation has operated will be met with a lot of opposition, because now I've got to go see a commission, or I've got to go see a certain staff person if I want to paint my house, when it didn't require a permit for the last 150 years in Geneva.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be a tough issue to solve, and we've reached out to surrounding communities on the sign aspect, and I think we need to get our arms around how to deal with this issue. Right.
So, I mean, I was a planner in Charleston, South Carolina, and they have COs. And that's a very, obviously extremely historic. Even in that kind of environment, very difficult to do COs. And what was ironic about it in terms of the palettes of allowable colors, so they have extensive guidelines. So, you can go in and pick your palette and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So the current thought process is that, back in the day, they were very pastel colors, very low-key type. But actually, they went in and did a paint study all the way back into the original wood. And actually, because of the pigments, they were very, very bright and vibrant colors.
Rainbow Row, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Rainbow Row.
So, again, extremely controversial. You get into paint, styles and like, do you do 2 colors? Do you do 1? I mean, it's a different animal. It's a very, very different.
I would really like to see, if there is a way to have it just apply to commercial buildings. I don't want to see homeowners have to jump through hoops, but I do think it's a different thing when you have a commercial building and you're talking about businesses that may want to draw attention to their building
Yeah,
in some way, like
obviously
this
a
building
bigger
obviously did.
issue.
Or even somehow tied to, you can paint something if it's intended to be painted, if it's masonry or something else, then you would need to go see somebody.
Right.
Yeah.
Could be
Yeah.
material
It's
driven.
really-
Even
yeah,
a homeowner,
it's
if you wanted to
hard,
paint
right?
your brick fireplace, paint it white, you all gotta go walk and see the city.
What I saw with this was, it's kind of off the wall, but when you get the businesses off of 3rd Street, you don't want to see Craft Urban with an arrow pointing that way, painted on the sign of the chocolate shop. You know, that's where, it could possibly go there if we would approve this ordinance.
It's true.
Yeah. So it's,
We don't allow signs that are directional signs.
right.
We
On
do
buildings.
have some directional signage that's allowed, but it's on the corner now, but it's not painted. It says Craft Urban, down the street. So we do, it's minimal. I think it's up to 10 square feet.
Very
But you're right, that could be painted if we remove that restriction.
Right.
Get ugly quick.
Yes.
And it's a tricky issue because so say somebody goes and paints the surface without their a certificate of appropriateness or without their permit.
What do you do?
Now what are you going to do? Are you going to tell them to damage it further by blasting?
Sandblasting it?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't have an easy answer, and I appreciate
I
the
know that.
thoughtful discussion tonight on that.
It's not easy.
Sign ordinances are difficult to draft and enforce, so
Sure.
you don't tinker with them lightly. You gotta really, really look at it close.
So this decision tonight, how does that affect the one applicant that's on hold?
His permit would stay denied.
Stay denied.
Unless the council overturns the recommendations by the HPC and Plan Commission tonight.
Okay. And when is this going to go before the
It's January 8th.
January?
It's committee of the whole, and then, the following.
And they won't be doing any outdoor repainting on the wall in January, so this is probably a
Can hang a
deferred
sign over it.
till April.
Yeah, just hang a sign over
They can
it.
put a sign over it and then paint behind it later, I guess.
Or not. If you block it with the,
They could come out 2 inches with, letters that match that exactly and just.
There was no input from Mike Simon, who owns that building?
oh no, he was involved, and I think he likes the vision that he authorized them,
Right, that's what I figured. He must have said this was okay.
And he sees it as part of their brand and part of their vision, and he, as the owner, authorized the application, so.
Because when I saw this, when I got my packet, I looked at it, I thought this was a joke.
I
was like, are
hadn't
they
noticed the
kidding?
building yet.
Oh, yeah.
I stopped on the way here tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this
The mural on the inside.
Looks like a fun place to go.
It does.
Yeah, I haven't
Like
been
to
in it.
try
I
it.
haven't been in it yet. Let's
Stop
see
on
if
the
it's
way
any
home,
good.
except we can't go in a group of.
You just can't talk about city business.
It's true.
Larger groups. If you're going for social outing, it's fine.
All right, Bim, I think.
Move to adjourn.
Cool. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yes, Merry Christmas.
I love your lights all around this town.
No, thanks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.